G'day, Ben from Melbourne here. Today I'm going to attempt to do the 25 greatest Australian bands according to me. Not you, me. There's been a few tags of this around doing like the 25 greatest UK bands and US bands. I'm guessing this will be the only entry into the Australian part of it. I might even do a New Zealand one just to, be out there on my own, I suppose. Of course, this is my taste. By no means do I have everything, and there's a lot of stuff that, I had to leave out. Do you go by your favorites? Do you go by influence? Do you go by what everybody else would probably say? I just went with what I thought. Here's 4 great records I had to leave out behind me. Civic House, God! And Powder Monkeys, others like Skyhooks, Underground Lovers, Black Cab, Sandpit, Lubricated Goat, the Cosmic Psychos, the Phobes and Custard, and millions more who I should have said. But anyway, let's get into it. Going from 25 to number 1. All right. Eddy Current, Suppression Ring. Yeah, you've heard me talk about these dudes, and in particular Mikey Young 1,000 times, the guitarist from Eddy Current, Suppression Ring. Been in a ton of other bands like The Green Child, Total Control, Ooga Boogers after this, and also his hand in a lot of production work and mastering and things like that. Put together some great compilations of early 70s Australian music, but this is where it's at. Eddy Current released 3 full-length records in the early 2000s, got back together maybe about 10 years later and did another one, and I think that might be it. These guys were a complete shot in the arm to the Melbourne scene and in Australia in general with their punk rock. It was back to basics, raw, lo-fi, in your face, recorded live in the room. A lot of it sounds like this one, Rush to Relax, probably has the most, for the want of a better word, studio tinkering, but studio and Eddy Current are not two things that go together. Fantastic band and a great way, I think, to start off. Next up, who would have thought back in the day when you saw Tex Deadly and the Dum Dums and the early incarnations of B Suburban and his other weird things like Thug and things like that, that Tex Perkins would become an ARIA award winner. That's like our big music awards show. With this album, The Honeymoon Is Over, The Cruel Sea. They were mainly an instrumental group for a while there, and Sexy Tex put the crooning side of Tex on top of these. I don't know how to describe these. They're kind of like if, an Australian band had a New Orleans funk stomp style to them. It's really groovy stuff. Had a big hit with The Honeymoon Is Over. And yeah, they've actually got a new record coming out soon. I think it might be their first one in 20 odd years. So it'll be very interesting to see. This is a great record. This Is Not the Way Home. It's another cracker as well. Down Below is another one. I think I've got that title right. But yeah, Cruel Sea, legendary Australian band. And The Giz. So many reasons to love them. You gotta love their work ethic, their independence. They just go about everything their own way, and they've found heaps of success doing it, which you got to admire, and how they can fit in a ton of side projects as well as, they probably average 2 records a year. Some records they release like 4 and 5, plus all of their own outside projects as well. You can just get lost in their world. There's a whole live bootleg series of things, ton of great stuff, and within the Giz sound you can find anything from like acid folk, freak folk sounds to garage rock, boogie rock and roll, prog sounds, metal, electronic, even some rapping on one of the records as well, and it all seems to work. Incredibly prolific band, but incredibly high quality output as well. Can't leave them off. Like, they did everything, start their own label, release their own stuff, had a ton of other bands come onto that label. They even had their own festival at one point as well. Always doing something new and interesting. Great band, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard at 23. Now, much older than the Giz Boys, X. Yes, the legendary Australian X. Round about the same time as the LAX. Different kettle of fish for sure. The LAX had a real clear rockabilly influence. These guys, it was like primal and skeletal spidery guitars with a huge throbbing rhythm section provided by Ian Ryland and Steve Lucas's like guttural vocals. It's like he makes Howlin' Wolf and Captain Beefheart and Tom Waits sound like crooners, man. Hugely influential band on the Melbourne punk scene. And of course, Ryland was from Rose Tattoo. There's another band which I could have put on this list but have left out. Even if they just had this album with Suck Suck and Police and Good On Your Baby, they would be legends, but they followed this up with a great record, At Home With You, with Degenerate Boy, which was covered by Mark Kane and probably 1,000 other bands. X, huge mark on Australian punk rock. Next up, we got the mighty Hoodoo Gurus, led by Dave Faulkner and Brad Shepard on guitar. These guys kind of got lumped into the Paisley Underground of the 80s, mainly probably because of their shirts and stuff like that, but their music's very much a more harder edge garage rock, especially the early stuff. They had a few hits later on and the sound got smoothed out a bit, but you can hear in their hearts it's like they're a garage rock band. It seems weird that them and bands like The Church got lumped into the same thing of the Paisley Underground. Quite successful on American college radio as well. For mine, the first record is still the best, but they're very consistent, still trucking along as well, which is great to see. Hoodoo Gurus at number 21. Now at number 20, The Scientists. There's been many versions of The Scientists, from teenage punks to sludgy, swampy goop, right through to possibly the inventors of grunge. Like, I'm talking more like the Tad and Mudhoney style of grunge, led by Kim Salmon. He was in, I think they were called the Cheap and Nasties, was the first band he was in, or just the Cheap Nasties, which were an early punk band, and James Baker played drums as well with him in early version of The Scientists. He would go on to Hoodoo Gurus, Be Suburban, Dubrovniks, and The Victims, ton of others, legendary bands. There are probably a few of them should have been on my list too, but hey, what are you going to do? Scientists, regularly, they're together and apart kind of thing. So depending on what Kim Salmon was doing, they were pretty quiet through the 90s when he had his Surrealist going on and then reformed and done another record. And now I see he's doing another thing called Smoked Salmon as well. But The Scientists, hugely influential band. So many American bands picked up on them, and also probably the Cosmic Psychos, sadly not on this list, but we'll give them a special mention. Number 19, this is a big cheat. I'm calling number 19 Geelong. So then I can squeeze in bands like Bored, who are direct descendants of things like Radio Birdman, The Hitmen, and Celibate Rifles, but the guitars are even more in the red. And then, of course, the mighty Magic Dirt, led by Adelita, who turned up the fuzz even more. But also later on found a little bit in the success in the charts because they managed to tame the fuzz with some hooks. And of course, I picked Living Eyes mainly because this is Billy Gardner's band, but more because of the Anti-Fade record, which Billy Gardner founded that label, and a ton of great Geelong bands and Melbourne bands now are all signed to Anti-Fade. A lot of punk, garage rock stuff, but they've even got, things like Banana Gun on there now and some more indie rock stuff, I suppose. But yeah, Anti-Fade, very important. Geelong, very important scene to the Australian music scene. Okay, let's do a normal one and say number 17, the Hard-Ons. These guys, this is pop punk, not that bullshit that they call pop punk now. As if Blink-182 are going to release a record called Dick Cheese, even though they're naughty boys, apparently. They're just fuckheads to me. Hard-Ons is where it's at. Ridiculously immature lyrics and artwork, but just great fun. They can be as catchy as you want, and they can also really make a lot of noise as well. And also great to see a multiracial band in the punk scene back in the 80s. Sydney guys. We got Kesh, who was the original drummer and singer. Unfortunately, he's not in the band anymore. But yeah, we still got the records. Now, what are we up to? Number 16, I think, maybe? Who can say? Laughing Clowns. This is what Ed Cooper did next after he left the Mighty Saints. Released some solo records at the same time as doing Laughing Clowns, which was what can only be described as jazz punk, I suppose, because the punk come from Ed's searing guitar sound, Jeffrey Wagner's wild drumming, amazing drummer, and of course a lot of horns. When we say jazz, this is no Miles Davis record. This is noisy punk influence stuff. Really, really original sounding band, legendary, ton of stuff to collect. Some people might find it a bit impenetrable, but when you're in, you're in. And now one that I featured recently, this record in particular, Born Sandy, Devotional by the Triffids. But the Triffids released a slew of brilliant records, just epic soundscapes of just loss, loneliness, love, all the big themes, but like Nick Cave, done brilliantly. Great lyricist. David McComb, sorry. I just had a brain fart there. Probably more accessible than what the Bad Seeds were at the time in the 80s. These guys should have been bigger than what they were. The Bad Seeds even stole Martin P. Casey in the 90s as their bass player from the Triffids. Fantastic band. They're like a songwriter's band, like a musician's musician. So you have everyone from Paul Kelly, Steve Kilbey, Mark Seymour from Hunters and Collectors, who I also didn't add. All love this band. Next up, the Lobby Lloyd with his coloured balls and the band Ball Power. Of course, Lobby's a guitar legend in this country. 60s amazing career before that when he was in the Purple Hearts, Wild Cherries. Also spent a stint when Billy Thorpe decided to drop acid and grow his hair, and the Aztecs got much more loud and rockin'. And then this I feel is like the bridge between 60s garage rock and what become punk rock in Australia. And also Lobby had his hand in some punk records as well. I believe he produced one of the X's records. not the X, I mean X's records. But this is just hard driving, no bullshit stuff. Kind of like a equivalent of pub rock, but the rhythms on this are faster and probably weirdly krautrockish in the repetition kind of thing. It's hard to describe the Coloured Balls, but they were a bridge and an important band in Australia. Died Pretty, led by the amazing Ron Pino, sadly passed. Amazing band. Started off kind of like a indie rock band with a ton of hooks driven by organ sounds. So I suppose you could say it had a bit of the power pop about it, and then transitioned beautifully into more of an indie pop band with big hits like Sweetheart, or was it a big hit? It's probably their best known song anyway. Just a brilliant band, one of the great live bands of all time. Sadly, Ron's no longer with us. Yeah, you can delve into any period of Died Pretty and it will knock your socks off. The aforementioned a few records ago of the weirdly titled Paisley Underground, The Church, with what I think's their best record, Blurred Crusade. Just a great songwriter, Steve Kilbey. Catchy. It's sort of like not in your face at all. It's pretty mellow, a lot of the Church's stuff, and but the more you get into it, there's more like layers going on. It's, good use of acoustic guitars alongside a lot of nice, clean guitar sounds. Everyone knows the album Starfish, that Under the Milky Way was a huge song and in every movie ever, but Church's first sort of 4 to 5 records are brilliant, and throughout the 90s they released some interesting stuff too. Still going with a different lineup now. I unfortunately haven't caught up with them, but they deserve a place on this list because they were just so damn good. Now, as far as originality goes, at number 13, The Dirty Three. Who would have thought a band led by a violinist and a drummer and a guitarist could become such a world phenomenon? Warren Ellis, now known as Nick Cave's foil, but Dirty Three actually released a new record this year, which is sublime. Equal parts beauty and ferocious on all of their records. Such an original band, all instrumental. They did have one record where they hooked up with Cat Power, who did vocals on a couple of tracks, which I thought worked really well. But they're in their element when it's just the three of them mind melding. Oh, and the hits keep coming. Sunny Boys with their self-titled debut. They released 3 great records. This is the strongest by far. Alone With You and Happy Man were big hits in this country. Just good, solid Australian rock music with a ton of hooks. Jeremy Oxley was like a gifted guitarist, songwriter, and singer as well. His brother Peter Oxley, who's been playing with Ed Cooper lately, he's like the foil, I guess, to Jeremy Oxley. Jeremy is kind of a serious dude, and Peter Oxley was a bit more laid back on stage. But yeah, lucky enough I got to see him on one of the tours where they reformed. I don't think that's going to happen ever again, but just legendary band. Check them out. Just, yeah, what else can you say? Of course, I had to get Roland S. Howard on this list, my favourite Australian guitarist, with his album These Immortal Souls. He was in The Birthday Party, Croman City Solution, then he come back to Australia, formed These Immortal Souls with his brother Harry Howard, plays bass in this band. I think he should be as well known as Nick Cave, in my opinion. He's so important to underground music in this country. He released a couple of cracking solo albums. Unfortunately, not enough music out there by Roland. Check out These Immortal Souls. It's grand in scale, I suppose, dark, brooding, very I guess the blackest of humor in his lyrics as well. I think he's a great lyricist. Legendary band. Now, Detroit Radio 5. I think I mixed up Radio Birdman, MC, Five Stooges in one word, influenced the Lime Spiders. So if you dig that shit, you're gonna love these guys with the very un-PC album Slave Girl. These guys were just tight as a fish's ass, amazing band. Mick Blood's, well, his name sums up his vocal style, but weirdly they had hooks as well. Fantastic Australian band, the Lime Spiders. Similar vein, In Your Face, Guitars in the Red, that similar influence, the mighty Celibate Rifles, led by Damien Lovelock on vocals. Bit more of a, what would you call it, drier vocal style. Bit different in the Australian punk scene, as in Damien had a lot of environmental issues on his mind, and there's a political stance in here as well. But this shit rocks, man. Like, one of their records, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, is probably my favorite Australian live record ever. It is amazing. And they had a ton of great records right into the 90s worth checking out. And I think into the early 2000s as well. Huge band in far as influence goes. Also, sadly, Damien no longer with us. So it seems to be a theme going on here, a lot of dead people. B Suburban. How can you not have B Suburban? What a band. Tex Perkins. Spencer P. Jones, who was in the Johnnies, Kim Salmon from the Scientists, and Boris Sujovic, who was also in the Scientists, and James Baker, who was in every band, Hoodoo Gurus, the Scientists, the Victims, you name it. This is our, like, death blues, cow punk. Hard to describe. They come together, the forces of the beast are bigger than the individuals. Amazing band. Number of lineups over the years, but seem to retain that menace. And they could do a slow crooning song like Cool Fire and then straight, into something like Hard For You. Brilliant stuff. What a band. Releasing a new record soon. Other end of the scale, the Go-Betweens. The smartest kids in the room, brilliant lyrics, acoustically based to start with. As they went on, they added extra instruments, had violin and keys and things like that. Just really good pop smarts. Another of the should have been bigger than they were bands. Robert Forster, Lindy Morrison and Grant McClellan, of course, were the original three. And just the opposite end of the scale of a lot of bands, punk bands in Australia were all really, that Radio Birdman Saints vibe. These guys were complete different. They were into Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, but they also listened to punk. So it's kind of, if you look at it through that prism, I suppose, you can see where they're coming from. Even though it's definitely not punk music, it is catchy. In indie pop is the best way to describe it, but it doesn't seem to say enough. Birthday Party. What a band. We're meant to be one of the most confrontational live bands at the time, led by Nick Cave, of course, Roland S. Howard, Mick Harvey, Tracy Pugh, and Phil Cavett were the original lineup. Tough for some people. It's very much art punk, not much in 4/4 time to tap your foot along. Unusual guitar style, unusual vocal style for its time. Very original, and they actually evolved a lot in a really short amount of time. When you think about where they started with this album, the self-titled one, and their last EPs, like the Bad Seed, I think was the last one. Yeah, a completely different kettle of fish by then, but always searching, always pushing, could never last. But their influence looms large. You can't not have this band. Midnight Oil just put us one of the probably, I don't know, handful of important bands that put Australian music on the map internationally. Such a powerful live band. And I love how their politics are front and center. Like, I'm on side with these guys. I don't care what anyone else says out there in the VC. Yeah, Peter Garrett had a failed political career, but at least he's put his money where his mouth is, and he got in the ring and tried to actually mix it. He didn't like turn up with an acoustic guitar in the fucking Ukraine like U2 and do basically fucking nothing. He actually tried to make a difference and change. He gave up music to get into politics and put his money where his mouth is. Instead of just talking about it, he went and did it. He didn't wear sunglasses during the daytime like some other people. I think they're one of the most important bands. Started off as, I think, a surf rock band with a punk influence and just become their whole different thing. And they evolved over time to just seem to embrace many, many genres within what they did. I think they're one of Australia's best bands. And yeah, AC/DC. What can you say? You gotta talk about them because, you know, they're a big part of pretty much what made an industry in Australia in the 70s with the help of the Alberts Publishing Company and the strength of Harry Vander and older brother George Young as the production team, which would go on and produce heaps of hits for hard rock bands and pop bands alike and launch AC/DC onto the world stage and become one of the biggest bands of all time, it could be argued, and which is amazing when you consider the pretty humble beginnings. But I love how they've just stuck to their guns, and yeah, you might say they're a one-trick pony, but they fucking do it well. Right, another cheat. My next band is called 60s Garage Rock for number 4. And of course, it's going to have people like the Purple Hearts with aforementioned Lobby Lloyd, huge influence on the Australian scene, that man, and the Australian guitar sound, especially in rock and hard rock. Missing Links, give you an idea of their influence. The Saints covered Wild About You off this album. They're like a fantastic garage rock band. Masters and Apprentices, I love the 60s garage stuff the best, but they become a whole different beast in the early 70s with almost like a singer-songwriter, even proggish maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, but this is the shit. And of course, the Mighty Loved Ones. In Excess even covered the Loved One off this, so gives you an idea of how important those 60s Australian bands are to this country. Now we're down to the top 3, so little bit more cheating. So the band that gave us the New Christs and the Hitmen, who are you're like, I had to show them. I know it's cheating, but of course, the mighty Radio Birdman. What can you say that hasn't already been said? This band probably over the course of time have become one of the most influential bands because there seems to be an ongoing love affair in Australia with that Detroit punk rock influenced sound and then put it through a Australian way of thinking, and it comes out in, for my money, even harder and better, yeah, I'm gonna say. And unusually a punk rock band with a keyboard player, and it sounds fantastic. It's more a rock and roll style of keyboard playing. These guys are amazing. Like, it would have been incredible to see them back in the day. I saw them when they reformed and they, you know, blew the roof off then. But yeah, Radio Birdman's influence can't be underestimated. One of the true great bands. And of course, the Easy Beats at number 2. What can you say? This is the band that put us on the map in rock and roll on the world stage, of course, with the huge hit Friday on My Mind. Stevie Wright set the template of what an Australian frontman should be like, influencing everyone from Bon Scott to Tex Perkins and you name it, any frontman worth his salt. he's got to be measured by this bloke. Killer rhythm guitar section, with the interweaving guitars, which Malcolm and Angus would go on to perfect, you could argue, but Harry Vander and George Young had it down already. Snowy Fleet on the drums, just killing it. And the sadly recently departed Dick Diamond on bass. Killer band. Ton of hits in this country, bigger than the Beatles at one point over here. I think they outsold them on several occasions. Went to England, the old Australian story, and fell apart over there, chasing a pop hit single, unfortunately, instead of sticking to their guns with what they were good at. But legends, this band. And again, Albert's publishing a big part in their story as well. Lastly, no surprise, is it? The greatest band that ever was and ever will be, the Saints. And I'm talking about the first 3 albums, Saints, of Ivor, Ed, and Chris. Kim Bradshaw on this one, and LG Ward on the next 2. I've said so much about this band, about how much I love them, the originality. No one plays the guitar like Ed Cooper. Probably him and Roland S. Howard just got the 2 best guitar sounds, in my opinion, and you can hear them straight away. When you hear them, you know it's them straight away. Chris Bailey wasn't just a punk barker. He had like a bit of soul on his voice. He could really sing. And an unusual rhythm section with these 2, Ivor and Kim. It was loose but tight, but just right. And they took on the world. Again, fell apart in England. Weren't cool enough for that scene because they didn't dress right, but they were like, unlike a lot of those bands, these guys were a live band playing regularly and apparently blew the doors off a lot of places in England when they were playing over there, because a lot of those punk bands, it had music out before they'd even really played much. These guys were a regular gigging band since 1974 when Ed and Chris were known as Kid Galahad. Legends. The best band, in my opinion, in rock music, bar none. Big call, you'll all disagree with me, but that's why this is my 25 greatest Australian bands according to me, and not you. If you lasted through that, I can't even talk anymore. You deserve a fucking medal. Thanks if you're stuck in there, and we'll see you in the next one. Maybe it's New Zealand. We'll try and make it not this long.